Story 1. When I was growing up, my dad and I lived with my grandparents. My parents had me when they were teenagers, and my dad got full custody because he lived with my grandparents, while my mom kept moving from one friend's house to another every few weeks. I was the daughter my grandparents never had, and they showered me with love and attention. One day, when I was 6 years old, my grandpa passed away from cancer. This story takes place about 5 months after his passing, on a Saturday, while my dad was at work. My grandma decided to take me to McDonald's for lunch, and like any excited 6-year-old, I was thrilled. So, we drove to the McDonald's about 1.5 miles from our house, ordered our meals, and sat down at a table to eat. At that time, we were the only customers eating inside. However, about 10 minutes later, a disheveled man who looked out of place in our middle-class neighborhood walked in. He ordered a meal and sat down at a table diagonally in front of us to the left. This man was at least in his mid-50s, with messy white hair, a scraggly beard, blue shorts, a dirty white t-shirt, and sandals. I couldn't help but notice that, under the table, he had something dark pink and wrinkled in his lap. He kept glancing at me and touching it, which made me feel queasy and nervous. I recalled what I learned in kindergarten about stranger danger and inappropriate touching, and it struck me that this man's behavior was not right. However, I didn't want to tell my grandma right away, fearing that the man might harm us. If my dad had been there, I would have spoken up because he was my hero and could handle any situation. Instead, I placed my Happy Meal box in front of my face to block my view of the man. Even though I had about half of my food left, I had lost my appetite. My grandma asked if I was full, and I nodded silently. Being petite, not finishing a full meal was nothing unusual for me. She then asked if I wanted to play in the play area, but I shook my head and whispered that I wanted to go home. After clearing our table, my grandma and I left McDonald's. I was still extremely nervous and felt like I was going to throw up. When we got home, my grandma noticed my distress and asked me what was wrong. I burst into tears and told her about the strange man at McDonald's and what I had witnessed. Remarkably, my grandma didn't panic, freak out, or become hysterical. Instead, she hugged me and reassured me that everything would be all right. She instructed me to go to my room and play, giving me a blueberry Kool-Aid burst and sending our dog, Patches, to be with me. Out of earshot, my grandma called McDonald's to report the man's behavior. As it turned out, the man was still there when she called. The manager assured my grandma that they would handle the situation. An hour later, the manager called back to inform my grandma that they had contacted the police, who arrived promptly and arrested the man. When the police asked the man to stand up, it was revealed that his private parts were still exposed from his shorts. The manager also offered my grandma a month's worth of coupons for free Happy Meals as a gesture of gratitude for reporting the incident. I have another story about a different weird encounter that happened a few years later with my dad present, but that's a tale for another time. Story 2. Back when I lived in a low-income housing apartment in Minnesota, my mom and I couldn't afford a proper internet provider. Consequently, I had to rely on unsecured wireless connections from my neighbors in the building whenever their internet was accessible. This had become a routine for me. One day, during one of these internet shortages, my neighbor Joe, an older man who lived next door, approached me. He informed me that he and another neighbor were heading to McDonald's for coffee and offered to buy me one if I joined them. I figured, why not? I didn't know much about Joe since I generally kept to myself. Let me describe Joe for you. He was a hunchbacked man with a large gut and a beard reminiscent of ZZ Top. His beard was often adorned with food crumbs, likely from a McDonald's biscuit. Despite his appearance, he seemed friendly enough, so I agreed. We embarked on a ride in his rickety truck through the harsh Minnesota winter, relieved when we finally arrived at the McDonald's with its free Wi-Fi. After Joe bought us coffee, I sat down and fired up my laptop to make use of the free internet. Shortly thereafter, Joe returned with our coffees and started conversing with me in a raspy voice. He began talking about something called God's DNA and claimed it was responsible for holding the universe together, as well as making men genetically superior to women. It was certainly not something I had ever learned in my physics class. Puzzled by his bizarre talk, I brushed it off and retreated to another booth to browse the internet in peace. Joe didn't seem to mind. Instead, he engaged in conversations with a series of oddly dressed, lumberjack-like individuals who came and went from the McDonald's, engaging in lengthy discussions. I couldn't help but sense that their conversations revolved around the topic of God's DNA, although I tried my best to ignore them. However, as I sat there, it became apparent that Joe and his peculiar entourage were occasionally glancing in my direction when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Having had enough of the weirdness, I decided to seize an opportunity when Joe left for the bathroom, presumably for an epic bowel movement. I quickly folded up my laptop and made my way out of the restaurant to brave the frigid Minnesota winter. As I headed home, I reflected on how enduring the harsh elements was preferable to remaining in the company of these strange lumberjack-like individuals. After that night, I sporadically encountered the McDonald's stalkers, but eventually stopped seeing them altogether. Story 3. I'm employed at a small McDonald's in a tiny southern town, and during my tenure, I've witnessed numerous peculiar occurrences and encountered some unsettling individuals. However, the incident I experienced today was beyond anything I could have anticipated. What was truly astonishing was the indifference displayed by many patrons who either failed to notice or chose to ignore the unsettling events unfolding right next to them. It was around 7 p.m., and our McDonald's was bustling with customers, including several children. I have a fondness for kids, and I often enjoyed watching them play in our restaurant's lobby. However, on this particular day, the sheer volume of customers required my full attention behind the counter. I had unintentionally overlooked the children for about 15 minutes. However, my attention was suddenly drawn to a man in our midst. He was speaking softly, almost in a whisper, to a small girl who appeared to be around 5 or 6 years old. The man was exceptionally tall, with a shaved head and dressed in a red shirt. He had a young boy of similar age on his shoulders, who was giggling. These children, with their beautiful blonde hair and blue eyes, seemed content and happy in his presence. Yet, something in my gut began to raise alarm bells. Why would a grown man inquire about a young girl's age, especially when he seemed to be unfamiliar with her? Shouldn't he already know her age if they were acquainted? The man's behavior took an unsettling turn when he suggested, "You should come with me now. I have a little brother who's also 6. Let's go play with him." As he began to lead the children towards the exit, I couldn't ignore my instincts any longer. I hurried towards the door, intent on intervening. Simultaneously, a blonde lady emerged from the restroom, calling out, "Hey, where are you going? Get over here!" She swiftly scooped up the little girl into her arms and reached for the boy as the tall man reluctantly put him down. Stammering, he explained, "Oh, I was just playing with your kids. They're really nice kids, and I just really like kids." The blonde lady forced a smile, but maintained a cautious demeanor, her eyes conveying a clear message to stay away from her children. She replied politely, "Well, I'm glad you had a nice time, but we need to order now." She then escorted her children to a booth at the back of the restaurant. The tall man hastily exited the front door, while the lady held her kids close throughout their meal, displaying an air of unease. If I ever encounter that man at work again, I won't hesitate to call the police. One can only wonder what might have befallen those children if their mother hadn't emerged from the bathroom at that exact moment. While it's concerning that she left her kids unattended in a crowded restaurant lobby, nobody deserves to have their children endangered by a disturbing individual with sinister intentions. Story 4. This tale marks my inaugural post on this subreddit, spurred by a persuasive friend who incessantly teased me about sharing this story. I'm a 23-year-old male residing in Florida, characterized by my introverted nature and limited outings from home. The incident I'm about to recount transpired a few months ago and left an indelible mark on me. It was approximately midnight when a bout of restlessness overcame me, compelling me to seek a change of scenery and company. Consequently, I decided to reach out to a female friend with whom I share a special bond. After arranging our rendezvous, we embarked on a customary outing to a serene, secluded park. Our time there consisted of driving past its vicinity, engaging in hours of conversation that spanned a myriad of topics, and indulging in a break from our routine. As hunger beckoned, we decided to make our way to McDonald's, a beacon of 24/7 fast food convenience. This is where the narrative takes an intriguing turn. Upon reaching McDonald's, we chose to enter the establishment instead of utilizing the drive-thru. My friend placed her food order while I decided to take a brief detour to the restroom, as cleanliness held a particular significance for me. Regrettably, I soon discovered that my decision to enter the restroom that night was ill-fated. Upon entering, I spotted an individual standing near one of those hand dryer units. At first glance, it didn't seem too peculiar. However, closer observation revealed that this person was hunched over the dryer, frozen in place, and utterly motionless. The initial oddity was the lack of movement. I tried to inquire politely whether the person had finished using the dryer, but my efforts were met with silence. A sense of discomfort enveloped me, and I decided to exit the restroom. As a result, I resorted to drying my hands on my shirt due to the absence of paper towels. Following this unsettling encounter, I rejoined my friend at a table to partake in our meals. Approximately 20 minutes transpired before we concluded our visit to McDonald's. My friend needed to use the restroom, and I reasoned that the previous occupant would have left by now. However, I was gravely mistaken. As I ventured into the restroom stall to relieve myself, I could distinctly hear the individual still present, repeatedly pressing the dryer button. A rising sense of unease washed over me. Upon completing my task, I proceeded to wash my hands once more. I decided not to contend for access to the dryer. Instead, I opted to avoid any potential confrontation. Nevertheless, my passage was blocked as the individual suddenly stepped back into my path, locking eyes with me. The individual, who appeared to be of a similar age as me, maintained a relentless gaze. With a perplexed expression, he articulated, "Excuse me?" I managed to stammer a response, offering a polite "pardon me" as I hastened past him and fled the restroom. Within moments, I found myself waiting anxiously for my friend outside the ladies' restroom, my thoughts consumed by the eerie encounter in the restroom. As she exited, she inquired playfully about whether I had made a new acquaintance inside. My response was a subdued headshake, accompanied by a fervent desire to distance myself from the unsettling individual. To my astonishment, the individual erupted into maniacal laughter, reminiscent of the Joker from fictional tales. I inwardly concluded that this unsettling character might pose a threat. Subsequently, he ceased his laughter abruptly, directing an unsettling focus towards my footwear. In a moment of unease, I muttered a brief "thanks" and hastened my friend towards our car. As we hurriedly got into the vehicle, we noticed the individual staring at me from inside McDonald's, his gaze unwavering. Panic ensued as he began to advance towards us, not quite running but exhibiting an unusual urgency in his stride. With rapid acceleration, I navigated the parking lot, thankful that the roads were devoid of traffic. My friend and I returned to our secluded spot, but the bizarre encounter at McDonald's continued to haunt me. My friend took it upon herself to tease me relentlessly about my peculiar bathroom encounter, an unsettling experience I will not soon forget.